First of all, I was listening to the phrase, the living word, and that's what we're talking about. We're talking about bread. You can be seated. We're talking about that bread from heaven. We're talking about that living word. But first of all, let me say something to those of you that are watching by internet. Yes, let's give them a hand. These are not people on the outside of the world. These are our people. This is part of our in-house online congregation, our gathering of people. Thank you for gathering with us today. And thank you for being here at this particular moment in time, regardless of the time and space you are watching. It doesn't matter if it's live or 2 hours ahead or whenever you do this. Just know that you are in this space with us. Block out everything. You are a part of where we are right now. And welcome to those of you that are in the house. Let me say up front what I'm about to talk about. And Jesus saw a boy with 2 fish, 5 loaves. He said, give it here. And Jesus gave thanks. He told over 5,000 men, beside women and children, to sit down on the grass. And when Jesus gave thanks, he broke the 2 fish and the 5 loaves, gave it to his disciples. And here is what I imagine he said within himself. Don't make it rain. Let it rain. And when he handed the 2 fish and 5 loaves that were broken to his disciples, he said, let it rain. And something miraculously happened. And now I'm going to backtrack and tell you why I believe this. Are you ready? Yes. All right. Make sure you hit the likes from algorithms. If you are in this house, don't go home and not hit the likes for something. If you all don't hit the likes, then I don't know who else gonna hit them. Hit the likes. Hit the share. And if comments, if you're not in Houston, tell me where you are watching this from. Because we need to know where you are, and we need to know if you're out of state or out of country. All of this makes a difference for what we are doing. Now, I know some of you are saying, he must be getting older, because I know he did this message 2 weeks ago. But it's not that, well, maybe I am. But at this particular age in my life, I'm squeezing more juice out of the orange. I'm not just like, it's not like you just squeeze a little bit. I want all of it because I want my money's worth out of this. And so I'm squeezing this juice. And of course, I was hearing people talk about, you know, make it rain. And I said, we could talk about those things. We've done that message before. I think I've probably done it several times. But then I got to my point and I thought about, this is not what Jesus said, let it rain. You say, well, I don't see where he says it. Well, I'm going to prove to you what he was saying inside of himself. How can you prove to me what Jesus could possibly be saying inside of himself? Well, I'm going to show you. And it's going to be something that's going to help you in business, when you give, when you break bread, when you are in corporate matters. There are going to be moments and times. I am going to show you in those moments and times when to say, and just quietly to yourself, you can even mumble rap it and say, let it rain. Every time you give, you are no longer going to just give something. you're going to give it and begin to say within you, let it rain. When you lay hands on your children or talk to them long distance, you are going to learn when they're in college and when they're out of school and trying to make their way in the world, you are going to begin to use this phrase. You don't make it rain. You can't really make it rain. Temporarily they can, but the money ultimately comes down and falls to the ground because you're not the author of rain. You have to learn to let it rain. So I'm going to teach you that. I don't know how far along I'm going to get, but I'm going to do the best I can. I was listening to a group of men, a group of actually young black men that were doing kind of a town hall kind of discussion. It was a young pastor that was leading it, and I was going through a few things, and they caught my attention on a short, and I said, okay, what are they talking about? And they began to talk about it, and the question was, my brother, why don't you go to church anymore? And I said, well, I kind of know what they're going to say, but let me listen to it. Let me catch what this generation is saying. And so one of them said, well, the reason I don't go to church is because it's too long. And they said they got announcements, and then you got to do, then somebody got to stand up and say this, and then somebody got to say that. Next thing you know, we 2 hours. And I said, well, you ain't never been to ALC, because I ain't never been. Well, only when the Holy Ghost really showed up. He had to really show up for 2.5 hours. But I said, okay, I get what he's saying. Then they asked the next one, and the next one says, well, I don't go because they always got to give to the building fund. And I said, okay. And he said, well, the building fund, that they need money for the pews. And then once they get the money for the pews, they come back and ask the people for money for the parking lot. Then once they put the parking lot in, they come back and ask the people for money to put the building on top of the parking lot. And I say, that's why you don't go to church? Okay, all right. Then the other one came up, and of course, I was waiting on this one. I waited for the P word. You know, preachers ain't nothing but a bunch of, but it's interesting that the pastor that was hosting it says, well, brother, I hear what you're saying, but just let me help you to understand something. If you're going to say it, I'm not going to stop you from saying it, but just remember this, that the P word are people who are traffickers in human flesh, in the trafficking of the human flesh of young girls and young boys across state lines and across countries, taking them from homes and families. Now, are you accusing your preacher of being that? Well, I'm talking about the mentality of taking the people's money. And the pastor said, well, understand something about black folk. Black folk ain't going to give you their last dime. And if they do, they got something else undercover. They already know that. So you need to I just don't like the fact that they be using people in the world. And so then they asked the fourth one, and the fourth one said, well, I agree with all of y'all. I was like that. As a matter of fact, I left the church. I got tired of all that black church stuff, and I just left. And they say, yeah, brother, we understand. And then the man said, but I came back. They say, where did you come back? Oh, you like the crowds? You like the music? He said, no, it wasn't that. Was it the singing? No, it wasn't. It wasn't that. He says, I was listening to the message. Oh, you was getting it. See, that's the problem. You getting all into that and to that preaching. And the man said, well, no, I had an older gentleman sit down and tell me something, and he's the one that helped me to get back into church. And they said, well, what did he tell you? He says, what you have to do is find a man with a message. Now, there could be a man or a woman, doesn't matter, but I'm just telling you what they said on this particular town hall thing. Old man told him, well, it's not an old man. He was actually a young man who was very successful, drove a nice car, looked good, dressed good, smelled good. And the other guy was just like a regular dude, And he said, well, brother, what, you go to church? The guy said, yeah. He said, what do you do? He says, you have to find a man with a message. and then separate the message from the man. The guy said, and I went back to church. I went through a few, but I found a man with a message. He got a few chinks in his armor. I understood he had a few rough bumps in life, a few tough times, made a few mistakes, said some things he shouldn't have said. He said, but the message, I was able to chew up the meat and spit out the bone. And I found out that it was a walk that we do. It is not just one thing that we deal with. It is a walk. And so I learned something as I heard those men. I realized, I said, now Lord, what are you saying to me? And I realized God may not give me the first guy or the second guy or the third guy, but he might send my way the other one that's looking for a man with a message. Whether you are in business, whatever area of life you're in, what I'm going to tell you today, it is so embedded in that scripture. Once I open it up, you're going to say, oh my God, it is going to be a principle of wealth and abundance like you've never seen before. And that is, it is realizing who you are talking to. And if you recognize who you have been sent to, you won't waste your time with those you think should be following you and why they left when they did. I had to count. There are over 330 million people in this country. And all I need is just 2 fish and 5 loaves. And the Lord on my side to let it rain. Say it back to me. Let it rain. See how it's resonating inside of you. And what else I'm going to open up today is something I alluded to last week. And I didn't break it up too much, but I said a little bit about it because I didn't want to say too much and leave you with something bad taste in your mouth. But I was looking at a milk carton and I was noticing, I said, why does milk smell funny? And so they were saying, well, the reason milk smells funny is because the expiration date is way over the expiration date. Well, I don't want to drink that milk. There are other things that you realize is past the expiration date. And you don't really want it. If you consume it in your body, it'll make you sick. What we are about to discover and what I have seen as I've been studying scripture is that there is an expiration date on Revelation. An expiration date on how we have done church. And an expiration date on what has been preached to you. And the reason you are not getting what you want or desire is because the expiration date on the word is over. Well, there is no expiration date on the word. Trust me, there is. And I found it. I'm not the first to find it. I'm one of many that have found it. But I just happen to be the one that's going to tell you. But they don't like to tell you these things, that there are expiration dates on things like this. I watched, I'll never forget, and this is why it is so important to understand what Jesus was doing. And the reason things shift and the reason things change, because for a while, we can be told one thing today or 10 years ago, and we're accepting this is the way God's going to do it. If you do this, God will do this. If you do that, God will do that. If you do that, God will do that. And it has to do with belief. I'll dig in there for a while, but it has to do with our belief. I was born with over 80% eczema over my body. And my mother at the time and my grandmother, they didn't know what to do. And so the doctor said, well, maybe, hopefully he'll grow out of it. And so I guess after they brought me home, they was raising me. It was about the time I'm 5 years old, it's time to go to school. But this eczema is all over my body. And with my skin, the skin was darkened. And those who know what eczema is, you know what that does. That crust, it darkens the skin, everything. And it's very embarrassing. You don't want anybody to see it. So I went to school. And so kids can be very cruel. And so, you know, you always, if you don't touch Eddie, you got the cooties. You know that. And, you know, something wrong, ooh, what is that? And so I always wore long sleeves because it was everywhere. And so my grandmother took me to doctors for several years. And I felt kind of like that one with the issue of blood. Took them to every doctor, but they could do nothing. And these were doctors. My mother was an OR, was an operating room nurse. And she took me to Cleveland Clinic, which was at Lakeside House, the best in Cleveland, Ohio. You know what Cleveland Clinic is. And so they tried everything. But this was in the 60s now. They tried, well, actually it was in the 50s. They tried everything. They put every cream, every dermatologist, the top names in dermatology, put everything on, and they couldn't get it fixed. One doctor even told my grandmother and says, well, he'll probably never get through this. It'll be here forever because of the nature of his skin. And my grandma said, what do you mean the nature of his skin? He says, you know, it's because he's black. And this is the way the skin, we don't, you know, black people's skin, it's just something that happens with black people's skin. And so my grandmother said, okay. My mother said, okay. So they came out of there, and my grandmother said, okay, let's go. I said, where are we going? We're going to the doctor's office. I said to myself, I've been doctor. She said, no, we're going to my doctor. She went to her doctor, and her doctor was a black doctor. He was what was called a DO. I don't know what a DO is. What is a DO? But whatever it is, the other doctor said he wasn't a real doctor. He hadn't been to all full school or something. So he was a DO. He was a very dark-skinned man. His glasses was kind of thick Coke bottle glasses. And she brought me in, and he was sitting there, and he looked at it, and he kind of took a little tweezers and took a little piece off, and he just looked at it, and he said, okay, let me look at this, and I'm going to call y'all back. He called me back, called us back in. A couple of days later, we went back in. He said, Iola, I want you to do something. That was my grandmama's name, Iola. You can tell that she's from Pickensville, Alabama. You can tell that Iola. So he says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to get some Dial soap. Now you have to understand, listen to what I'm saying. Don't go get no Dial soap and try this now. The Dial soap now, it was not the Dial soap back then. All the other doctors and who were not black doctors kept telling my grandmother, you must use Ivory soap. Now the commercial for Ivory soap was these pure white little children, and their skin was nice and pure and clean. And if you use Ivory soap, which is 98% pure, 99% pure, and it floats, you will get rid. But Ivory soap didn't do anything. He said, go get Dial soap. Well, why Dial soap? And here's what the black doctor said. He says, I got something's in my brain. And I always said, what is it? He says, Dial soap is one of the few antibacterial soaps. I got a funny feeling about this. Dial soap back then was a pure, as a matter of fact, Dial to even today, it's hand soap, they do have an antibacterial, because that was the foundation of how they made Dial soap. All the scent and everything wasn't like it was back then. There was less scent. All those things were not in it. It was Dial soap antibacterial. And he said, and I want you to get this cream off the shelf. She said, what is it? He said, it's called Archer Skin Tone Cream. Now they use it for bleaching and things like that. He said, but at that time, he said, I want you to do something to it. And he said, I want you to scrub his neck, all the places on his body, until it's almost raw. I cried for over a year. And my grandmother, for 2 years, until I finally just started trying to hold it in, would come in there and I would see her with that washcloth scrubbing my entire body with dial soap until it was almost raw. Then I would get out the tub and then she would put that Archer Skin, they had tubes of it. She would put that Archer Skin Tone Cream all over my body. I just remembered it was almost traumatic. I went through that probably for about a year or two, I believe, and thought no more about it until I was old enough to be able to scrub my own skin. And she told me, you got to scrub it till you can't stand it no more. And I did it, and then put that Archer on there. It was a few more years, and I remember being in high school. It was years later. I was still, I don't remember as much of it, but I remember, and while I was there, one of the girls behind me touched my neck. And I jerked, I instinctively, what'd you do that for? She said, oh, no. I was looking at your skin, and of course I'm self-conscious. I said, what do you mean? She said, it is the prettiest thing I've ever seen. How you get your skin so smooth? And I put my hand behind my neck. It had been this way for years. But in my mind, I thought I was still filled with eczema all over my body. Because of these men who said it would never go away. What we found out is the old black doctor said, Ola, now make sure you don't do this, scrub this, use this. Do not put any colored shirts on him, no colored t-shirts, no colored underwear, no colored sheets. Everything must be white. We found out that back then at that particular time, the dye in the clothes, when the kids would play and sweat, got up under black skin, and white people couldn't tell the difference from black skin and colored dye. So you had to go to a black doctor who understood the difference of this thing. And then I remembered what I still do to this day. I don't use Archer anymore. But at this age, I still have some of the prettiest skin because of what I do. Oh, everywhere, baby, everywhere. And to this day, when I wash my face and everything, when I do what my grandmother did when she used to scrub me. And what she did, I would see her lips moving and moving and moving and moving and moving. And she was talking in them funny languages. Because they believed that she went to another level because it was her child. The old thing about just do the best you can and go through it and he'll be all right, and God has given this to teach him something. My grandmother said, oh, heck, no. That God ain't teaching him nothing. If God wants to teach him something, let God talk to him when he get old enough to understand. But don't teach him through no sickness. I'm going to work this thing until it's gone. Or God going to have to take me out of here for doing it. There are expiration dates. Just because they did that in church before COVID does not mean you got to do it now. And in order to receive revelations like this, you've got to begin to dig into realizing one thing, that God can exchange a B for an M for a B. He can turn a BL for an M. He can turn mess to bless. And you must understand that many of God's miracles come out of impossible things. I want to teach you how to look for things and not limit yourself to what they've always told you about God. You got to learn that there is a new God out there. Not new God, because God never changes. But if God never changes, it just means we can't catch up to him. So that means we've got to change in order to follow him. Exodus chapter 16. And they're probably going to put it on the screen. I'm not going to have anybody to read it because I sometimes put y'all in positions that I shouldn't. But I'm going to let you look at it and follow along, and I'll paraphrase. And what happened was the children of Israel had come out of enslavement, and they followed Moses. They got out into the wilderness. They were thirsty. Moses they found some bitter water. Moses took a tree, threw it in the water, made it sweet. And then what happened was they got out in the wilderness and they got hungry. They got hungry. And they told Moses, we had bread in Egypt. We were better off in enslavement because at least they gave us our bread in the morning and food and meat at night. We were better off in we could depend upon the Egyptians to feed us. So Moses, you have brought us out here to die. And so God talks to Moses and said, listen, they're going to have to understand that Egypt has expired and how I provided for them, because understand, even though Egypt was putting the food there, God was still providing because he could loosen or tighten Pharaoh's heart. But anyway, God said it's time for them to come out of the expiration date of what was. He said, I'm going to give them a new revelation. And Moses said, well, what are you going to do, Lord? God said, I'm going to make it rain bread. Now that sounds pretty easy, doesn't it? If you're God, make it rain bread. And when I thought of it, I've always read the scripture about make it rain bread. I always thought about those dinner rolls, them crescent rolls that they're a little bit used to do like that, And I thought of those little crescent rolls, and I said, I wonder did God rain down crescent rolls? Or maybe he rained down them homemade yeast rolls my grandmama used to make. Did he just rain them down and they just bounce off the floor of the wilderness? Or was them little tiny little Wonder Bread bags where they just bounce off? I said, I don't know, how did he make it rain? How did he rain down bread? And so as you read on, it talks about what was it? And they got there, and God said he was going to do it. And then what happened is he said, tell them to get up in the morning. He said, when they got up in the morning, the dew had fallen. When the dew had already dried off, there was left on the floor of the wilderness, on the ground, this flaky stuff, these little small round things. And the people said, what is it? That was the phrase, what is it, was translated manna. Manna means, what is it? Because they never knew what it was. For 40 years in the wilderness, they ate of it every morning, never knew what it was. God said, make sure they don't have it overnight because it's going to stink. And so overnight it's going to stink. And so God said they need to understand this. In other words, in the morning, they got to get up and get the manna fresh in the morning, which means that revelation must be fresh every day. if you're still in the same church mode with the same revelation that your praises go up and the blessings come down, or God gonna do it in 2.5 days, or if you're still under them push buttons and screaming and shouting, oh yeah, hallelujah, and you're having a problem because the thought in the bubble in the midst of your mind is about to break, because your faith is about to go crazy. Your faith is about to go AWOL, because your faith is based on a thought in a bubble in the middle of your mind. Now, well, I'll get to that in a second. But what happened was they would get up in the morning and there was that. Then the next morning they would see it would happen again. And this one. Then it would happen for 6 days, and then God told him, he says, now this time just take double what you're going to get. He said, and hold on to it. It ain't going to stink this time. I'm going to have to hold it over, because they didn't have any refrigeration. Because it's the Sabbath, because I need you to rest. You need to take time to rejuvenate, to meditate, to rest, to understand yourself when you get up in the morning instead of going full-fledged into work, or at night just trying to go to sleep. You need to take a moment, breathe, and let it out so that you can begin to realize that God has new mercies every morning to realize these things. And so they would get up in the morning and there was this manna. And they tasted it was sweet. They said it was like honey and coriander seed. You go off into Exodus, I believe in chapter 11, and they talk about what manna is. No, that was Exodus 16. You probably go into Numbers chapter 11, I think is where it is. And they'll find out what manna was. And they said they would take it. They would gather. It took a lot of it because it was just little flaky things. I thought it was little round pellets or something, but it was like flaky things. It was like, they called it like hoarfrost, which means like snowflakes, larger snowflakes that they would scoop off the ground, and they would get a lot of it, take it, they would grind it up, and as they would grind it up, they could bake it, and it would be this flat bread. Or they could take it and stir it in water, and it would be a sugar drink. In the evening, there would be quail all over the place. So they ate quail and in the evening. So they ate bread in the morning, quail in the evening, protein at night, and carbohydrates in the morning. Okay, all right, okay. Oh! There's just so much in me on this one. And so what happened was, this is what they did. Well, let me tell you this much, because I want you to realize that when you let it rain, God will do things unexpectedly. Well, let me tell you what manna is. There is a little bug that is called the mealybug. And the mealybug would sit on top of these gum-like trees that were all over the wilderness where the children of Israel were during that particular time. They had been enslaved for 400 years. They knew nothing about these kind of things. And so the little mealybug loved the juice of this tree. This tree in the wilderness would drive its roots so deep that it would find water that it could not, that was unfindable almost. And then this tree, along with its natural chemical components and its ability to draw what it needs, its chlorophyll and everything from the sun, produced a very sweet sap. Well, the mealybug loved the sap. And it would go to the tree, get on top of the leaves. It wouldn't eat the leaves, but it had a little tubular thing that came out of its mouth, and it sucked the juice out of the leaf of the mealybug, out of the tree, and it would go inside of the mealybug. Well, the mealybug was greedy, and so the mealybug would not stop drinking when it was full, so that it would keep drinking until the syrup, the juice, the sap out of the tree would force itself with such great force through the intestines of the mealybug, and it would spurt out on the ground. And all over the place were mealybugs, and it would spurt out on the ground. And when the night would come, and in the morning the dew would settle and rise, there would be these little flakelets on the ground that looked just like snow. Not what you see in the movies like cotton candy coming down. It tasted like cotton candy, but it was there. And they said, what is it? And they scooped it up off the ground till they finally got enough to make something of it. What it was the poop of the bug. None of the children of Israel ever looked deep enough to find out where it came from. It was the little poop of the bug. It was the excretion, the waste of the bug. And the reason it would stink if you held it overnight is because the ants knew where it was and would find it, and the maggots would grow out of it because the mist stopped the maggots from growing. So when God said he would rain it down, God said, I don't have to tell you where I got it from. I just need to tell you that before you need it, I have already provided it. The only reason you don't know where it is because you're looking for a revelation of the pot by the door in your enslavement. I've moved you to another place. And now Jesus says, here is what I told them to do. He says, tell the folk to sit on the ground and replicate the manna. And they will pretend to be manna. And when I look at the folks sitting on the ground, I see the manna. And when I break this fish and this bread, I will look out over the entire ground of the wilderness and say, now let it rain. And what it did was it connected God with the rain. And if I were to finish this message, which I'm not, it would end like this. My thoughts are higher than your thoughts, and my ways higher than your ways. And as the rain comes down and waters the earth and maketh it bring forth, so shall my word be. And Jesus said, my word is spirit and it is life. But you see, only those that can come from the Father can get to me, because you see, you can't follow me unless the Father has given it to you to do so. I'm just getting started. God bless your heart. Hello, I'm Ed Montgomery, and I want to encourage you about one thing. Don't you let your season pass you by. I've been talking on these little bitty clips about flowers and opening and blooming, but it takes pollination. In other words, it takes somebody going from one flower to another flower, and that's somebody, little bees and things of that sort. But just like bees will go from one flower to another flower and cause pollination and cause those flowers to reproduce, I think we touch each other's lives the same way. When we smile at each other, we reproduce joy and happiness. Our world needs so much. This is what ALC does. And when you give, you make a huge difference in our world. Take the time, go to myalc.org. That's myalc.org. Hit the donate button. You can give that way. Second way to give is to be able to use your text to give on your phone. And you can send it to the number 713-742-2035. That's 713-742-2035. And put however much the amount you want to give right in that text message part of it and send it safe and secure. Not only that, but you can use your app
Don't forget, if you're in the app right now, you can give through it right now. And then also, you can use your P.O. box. Just slip a check. People do still do checks nowadays. Or you can give through your debit cards or credit cards if you got an envelope. But if you're just mailing it, put a stamp on that envelope and you can send it to Abundant Life Center, P.O. Box 772-300, Houston, Texas 77215. Thank you so much for everything you do, for your contributions. I really appreciate you. Thank you, ALC, Abundant Life Center. And for all of you, ALC globally, thank you for being a part of our lives. I hope we can continue to be a part of your life. Love you.